And good afternoon, Pittsburgh Steelers fans, and welcome to another edition of Steelers Brunch with Tony. I am your host, as always, Tony Defio, and I thank you for joining me on this fine Saturday afternoon. As always, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to Behind the Steel Curtains YouTube channel, where we bring you at least one, sometimes two podcasts each and every day. And you can also download these podcasts on various podcasting platforms like iTunes. I think it's one of them. I'm not exactly sure, but I'll have to look into that. But I know we are definitely expanding into the and trying to increase our downloads and get more people to listen because we're bringing you great content each and every day. The standard is the standard. Steelers preview, the Stat Geek, the Big Bro Sco Show, Beck is Black. Or Beck in Black. I'm sorry. That just debuted on Wednesday night with Michael Beck and Jeffrey Benedict, who really knows his football. I was really impressed with him. I've seen him in the community for years, and I was really impressed with his football knowledge. So that and Steelers Q&A every Monday at 5 o'clock in the off season with Brian Anthony Davis and myself. And immediately after that show, at least up until the season starts, there's the Steelers Retro Show where we talk about some fun Steelers memories from the past. And in the regular season, the Steelers Q&A changes over to the Steelers Hangover, where we discuss the previous day's Steelers games. So please check all that out and check out the Behind the Steel Curtain website, where we bring you countless articles each and every day. We cover the breaking news. We give you commentary. We give you film breakdown. We talk about the salary cap. We talk about the draft. We talk about the season. We talk about anything and everything. As we like to say, it's your one-stop shop for all your Steelers news. So please check that out. So welcome everybody in the live chat. There's Steelers Pittsburgh, Sean Manahan, Lumberzack. I love that name, Lumberzack. That's pretty good. Ezra, Wes Hickok, my man Wes. There's T Money, my very good friend Terry. There's Tom Valajo. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Kathy Ford. She just wants to tell us she's dropping by, but she's at work and counting on me for an interesting ride home. That's a lot of pressure for your ride home from work, but you'll be riding home from work, so you should be in a good mood anyway. So hopefully I can entertain you on your way home. So John Trent is in the live chat. So welcome everybody. And as always, I want to cover a few topics on today's show. And by the way, just if you're listening to this on a podcasting platform, I just want you to know that this is part one, and I will be back, or I will have a part two to this show, and I will let you know when that happens. I'll let you know when part one is over and when to download part two. As for those of you in YouTube who are watching on YouTube, it'll be just like always. There will be no changes. So just you'll see a kind of an end to the first half and a beginning of the second half at some point, but I'm not losing it. That's just our new thing. I think it's a really great thing. Guys like Jeff Hartman and Dave Schofield and Brian Anthony Davis, the podcasting coordinator, the manager of the podcast, they've all been doing a great job of trying to make your podcasting experience that much better. So I hope our new style will lend itself to a better experience. See, Alex Flores, just me. Okay, so I have a few topics, and I think the most exciting part of the week, at least to me, was Tuesday when quarterback Ben Roethlisberger spoke to the media virtually for the first time since undergoing major elbow surgery early in the 2019 season. And he spoke about the ordeal and when he kind of knew that something wasn't quite right in that game. It was on a deep pass to receiver Juju Smith-Schuster late in the second half, and he talked about his rehab and the fact that he's more determined than ever to come back and to come all the way back and bring the organization, as he put it, several more championships. And it was nice to hear from him. And I wrote about this the other day, but I kind of already knew this, all of this. When I had my doubts was during last season, when you would see Ben on the sidelines after he had his surgery. His arm was in that crazy looking apparatus where he couldn't bend it. Obviously, he had major reconstructive elbow surgery. He had 3 tendons reattached, so he was going to be able to move it for a while. But he had the gray street sweats, and he kind of looked out of shape. He had that big bushy beard, and you were wondering, if he could make it all the way back. And based on some of the things he said in recent years about, he contemplated retirement after the 2016 season. He had his contentious relationship with Antonio Brown. It seemed like he just wasn't into it as much as he, you would want him to be. The hunger maybe didn't seem to be there. And of course, he had his a contentious relationship with Todd Haley for a number of years. But when I saw him throw that football for the first time in February, after he was cleared to do so by his doctors in California, I started to feel good about the possibilities of him coming back. If you remember back then, there were people in the media like Adam Shine and some writers who were saying, I don't know why Ben's even bothering. He looks out of shape. He looks like he could barely throw. I don't know why fans are so excited about this. They should just cut him, or he should just retire. It's whatever, but I thought it was good news. And then of course we fast forward to a few months later, he posts that hype video, in conjunction with him finally shaving that big kind of silly looking beard of his. No offense out there if you have a big beard like that, but that big bushy beard that he had, that he grew all the way out into the off season, he finally trimmed it and he shaved it off, and he posted a video of that and him throwing what looked to be pretty hard passes, pretty crisp passes, or at least passes with a lot of effort behind them, to Juju and Ryan Switzer and James Conner. And he also looked pretty thin. I remember writing about that, and one of the first people that commented on the article said, he looks like he could lose another 20 pounds or so. But to me, he looked thin. He really did in that video. And that was before he shaved the beard off. In this video where he was throwing these passes around. It was only like a 20 or 30-second video. He still had the beard, but he did look much thinner. And of course, now when you see the pictures of him from training camp, the Steelers reported, of course, end of July into early August, people were still reporting, and he looks tremendous. He looks in the best shape that he's been in since probably before the second Super Bowl. I'd say maybe 2006, 2007. He looks in great shape. And the reason why I think he's back, in addition to these videos of him throwing the football, he's been through so much in his career physically, right? I mean, he had his second season, the year they won Super Bowl 40 over the Seahawks. That season, people may have forgotten, he suffered a pretty bad knee injury in the middle of the year, and he had to have surgery, and he missed a few weeks. So he had that, and then of course that off season he had that horrific motorcycle accident where he had to have reconstructive surgery, and I mean he suffered any number of ailments, high ankle sprains, the SC shoulder sprain a number of years ago. He had a bruised MCL in 2015. He missed a month. He had the torn meniscus, right? I mean, he had the broken nose. I mean, of course, in the late 2000s, especially in the early 2010s, before the offensive line became what it would eventually become as one of the best units in the NFL. I mean, he was really just beaten up on a weekly basis, one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the league back then. So for him to endure so much and also accomplish so much, he's already accomplished so much, through the 2018 season, which was his last full season in the league. He had already accomplished so much up to that point. He won 2 Super Bowls. He took the team to a third. He's arguably the greatest quarterback in team history. He's certainly one of the top 20, 30, 40 who have ever played in the NFL. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. You would wonder if he would just say, you know what, I've done everything there is to do. I want to spend time with my family. I have 3 young kids. It's time to ride off into the sunset rather than go through the rehab. But for him to put himself through the rigorous rehab, all these months of rehabbing that surgery repaired elbow, and to lose all the weight to condition himself at the age of 38, it tells me that he knows that he has what it takes to make a full recovery and to come all the way back, and maybe not to be the player that he was in his mid-20s or his late 20s, when he was in a lot of ways supernatural with his athleticism and his ability to take a pounding and to make people miss and keep plays alive and make things happen downfield. Maybe he's not that player anymore, but who is at the age of 38 the same person they were at 25 as far as their physical abilities, right? None of us are. But I think the fact that he's had an entire offseason where he's been, obviously he's not out there throwing 200 passes every day, I don't think, but he's I'm assuming, in addition to his rehab, he's been throwing passes on a fairly regular basis since he was cleared to do so in February, when we saw that quick little 5-second video. And if there were going to be any issues, as I've talked about before, I think we would have known by now, and he's still not out of the woods, right? He still has to go through a training camp, which, he's not going to be necessarily in harm's way there either, because I'm sure he's still going to be on a pitch count in training camp like he is right now during the ramp up to the padded practices. But we're probably still not going to know for sure where he's at until the season starts, because again, these guys aren't allowed to get hit. Quarterbacks aren't allowed to be touched in training camp. He might maybe smack his hand on a helmet, or maybe hit his elbow on a helmet or something like that. But as far as being hit and being taken to the ground awkwardly and having to make quick decisions, he won't have to really worry about that until the season starts. But as far as I'm concerned, with modern medicine being what it is, I mean, just in 2012, Adrian Peterson almost broke the single season rushing mark 1 year after suffering a major ACL injury, and heck, if you look at Terrell Davis in 99, 2000, that time period where he had an ACL injury, it pretty much ended his career. Gale Sayers back in the 60s, he came back and played after. I'm not sure if they even knew what the injury was, because it was the 60s and they didn't have the technology that they soon would have. But he played a little bit after his major knee injury, but he was never quite the same. But things are different now, and 38-year-olds now are they look much younger, they act much younger than they did 30, 40, 50 years ago. Willie Stargell was 38 in 1979 when the Pirates went on their We Are Family World Series run, right? And they referred to him as Pops. He was out of shape. He really wasn't athletic, and he looked like an old guy. Ben's the same age as Pops was back then, and he looks like he could be his son, right? Tom Brady's 5 years older than Willie Stargell was back then, and he looks much younger and in much better shape, right? I'm 48, and when I was a young kid, my grandparents were essentially the same age as I am now, and they did not act like I act now. They were out of shape. They didn't exercise. They had trouble getting around. It was just a different time back then. And I think, when you see more and more quarterbacks playing into their late 30s and into their 40s. I mean, back in 2009, when Brett Favre was still playing at the age of 40, that was considered a big deal. Well, now you have Drew Brees, you have Brady, you have Ben. Peyton Manning played till just before his 40th birthday. When after the 2015 season, he turned 40. I think it was like his birthday's around the same time as Big Ben's. So he played into it. He wasn't the same player as last year, but he still was really effective into his late 30s, right? Eli just retired. He's around the same age as Ben. People were talking about Aaron Rodgers. I read an article the other day. I think Michael Backer. I forget who wrote it for Behind the Steel Curtain about maybe Aaron Rodgers taking Ben's place if he decides to retire in a couple of years. Well, Aaron Rodgers was drafted a year after Ben, so he's not that much younger. Maybe a year, two at the most. I don't know how. I think Aaron Rodgers is maybe 36, 37. So, times are different now. These guys are capable of playing longer. So, again, I think if Ben had felt that like he reached a point of no return and he just didn't want to go through it anymore, he didn't want to endure the pain and of trying to rehab and the blood, sweat, and tears of that whole process, I think he would have just retired, not even bothered to try to come back. But again, the fact that he has gotten himself into the best shape that according to him, that he's lighter than he's been since maybe the late 2000s. So that bodes well. And before I move on to my next topic, I just wanted to say that the thing that I found the most encouraging about what he said on Tuesday was the fact that his elbow had been bothering him for a number of years, like the last 2 or 3 years. And I think some of his, if I'm not mistaken, some of his offensive linemen have also said that he had mentioned that his elbow just wasn't quite right. And you know how it is with these athletes. I mean, they're conditioned, they're trained, both mentally and physically, to play through pain, right? They have to, they're told you got to be there for your guys, you got to be there for your teammates, and you got to play through it. You got to endure the pain. Pain doesn't exist, like Vince Lombardi once said. Pain's just in your mind, So I could certainly envision a scenario where he maybe in 2016, 2017, somewhere in there, where he thought, my elbow doesn't feel quite right. But it's still getting the job done, and we have a chance to win the Super Bowl, and I can't really have this thing closely looked at, And if you look at his deep passes over the last 2 or 3 years prior to 2019, they were pretty shaky, right? I mean, we commented on that a lot. We talked about it. He just there were guys that were open. They would have like a few steps on their defenders, and it would either be either underthrown or overthrown or whatever. It just didn't have the same look that it did, in previous years, And then also look at his interception rate since he came back from his MCL sprain midway through the 2015 season. I mean, you can say what you want about it, and I've written about it, and I was taken to task by people for bringing it up, but I mean, it was a real thing. From the time Todd Haley was hired in 2012 through 2014, Jeffrey Benedict mentioned this the other night. The 2014 was without a doubt Ben's best year, statistically, every which way. That was his best season, and he comes back in 2015. The offense looks like it's going to be a juggernaut, and then he gets hurt, and the offense is still pretty good once he comes back, but there was that matter of the interceptions, the thing that sort of plagued him prior to Todd Haley coming in and trying to make him a more efficient quarterback, to tweak his game, like Art II said at one point. That all seemed to go away, and he just year after year after year, he was making these baffling decisions, and it kind of made you wonder why. Well, we talked about the obligation he may have felt to pass the ball, to get Antonio Brown as many targets as possible, because let's face it, AB wasn't happy if he wasn't getting targets. We all know that. That's not a secret. So maybe there was that, but maybe also he just wasn't feeling right. I mean, maybe those 3 tendons that he had reattached during that surgery, maybe they were starting to go a little bit, and he just played through the pain. He gutted it out, right? We'll never know. But I think that was the most encouraging thing, because if you think about it, what part of his body now is stronger than his elbow at this point? He spent many months, he had it surgically repaired, obviously, but he's also spent many months rehabbing it, strengthening it, doing whatever he can to make sure that it's as healthy and as strong as it can be for the upcoming season. So maybe maybe his elbow is the least of the Steeler fans' worries and the Steelers themselves. I mean, maybe it's sort of whistling past the graveyard because he is 38, and Terry Bradshaw had a similar problem at the end of his career, but again, that was 1983 and not 2020. So I think it's encouraging news all the way around. It's something that as I mentioned, I kind of already knew all these things. I kind of already put it in my mind that he was going to come back, and he just sort of reaffirmed all that. Coach Tomlin was talking about it. I think it was yesterday or Thursday about how he doesn't have the spiral quite the old Big Ben spiral that he's used to. But I don't know if that's coach speak and he was trying to light a fire or if he was just kidding. I don't know. I didn't see the press conference, so I'm not sure what the tone of that statement was. But by all accounts, he's not having any problems with his elbow, and I think that's good news. And I think it's going to bode well for the Steelers. And based on modern medicine and the fact that it's 2020 and the fact that so many quarterbacks play into their late 30s, into the early 40s, I think that bodes well for him and for the Steelers moving forward. So that's my first topic. And I wanted to touch ever so briefly on my second topic before I bid the first half of the show adieu. And that's the fact that Antonio Brown he finally learned his fate last weekend. I think it was last Friday, the Friday before yesterday, or the Friday before last. You know what I mean. And he learned that he would be suspended for 8 games due to conduct detrimental to the league based on a lot of his off the field behavior over the last few years. He was arrested earlier in the year for assaulting a driver. Of course, he had the incident in Miami. There's a lot of things that that AB has brought on himself over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, he's really been in self-destruct mode, especially since the end of the 2018 season when the Steelers ultimately traded him away to the Raiders. He got cut from the Raiders because of, again, not being a very good teammate, and then he signed with the Patriots, and they cut him after a game because of sexual assault allegations surfaced, I think, from his old trainer. I forget the relationship he had with the woman, but she accused him of sexual assault, and then she eventually filed a lawsuit for it. So he certainly had his problems in recent years. But the fact that he finally has learned his fate, I think maybe that gives him some structure in his life. Because I think without structure, Antonio Brown, as I wrote about last week, he's kind of a boat without oars, right? He has no direction, no purpose in life, and I think he needs that, right? Because we see how dedicated he's always been to his craft. Say what you want about him as a person, but he's always been dedicated to his craft. And as angry as I was with him after the 2018 season and how he comported himself during the 2019 season, with dissing Ben, dissing Coach Tomlin, the Steelers, and essentially ruining what had been a great relationship with the fans. As angry as I was then, it as they say, time heals all wounds. And it's funny. He asked to be interviewed by 93.7 The Fan sometime after the new year. I forget when it was exactly. I think it was after his arrest. It seemed like a whole lifetime ago. Things have changed so much with the world since the beginning of the year. But the fact you would hear him interviewing with these guys, and many of all these guys knew him during his time playing in Pittsburgh. He seemed to have a good relationship with Jim Colin Dunlap, and they seemed to have great affection for him. And that sort of started to change the tide for me as far as wanting to forgive him and wanting to move forward and hope for nothing but the best for him as a player and as a person. Because you like to see society, as much as we were a hating society, right? People always talk about how cynical we are. I think we do love a great redemption story, and and it's always a good thing, no matter who it is, to see a person turn their life around, right? And Big Ben's a good example of that. People may forget about this. They know about the sexual assault allegations, and they were very serious issues that he had back early in the part of his career. But he was also, it's no secret that he was kind of a jerk, at the very least. Whether he was never charged with sexual assault, but he was definitely, in the court of public opinion, he was convicted for being, at the very least, a jerk. And his relationships with the fans, and how he treated people when he was out, as far as bar owners and servers. He was notorious for not tipping them, that kind of thing. He had a very bad reputation. Joey Porter reportedly confronted him one time in the locker room for not being a team player. Charlie Batch. Matter of fact, he said, "You're not a team player. You're not a great teammate. You have to straighten yourself out. You have to be the kind of leader that a quarterback of your ability should be." There was a time before all the BS hit the fan with him. Finally, with him almost being charged with sexual assault in Georgia. There was a time in 2009 where he evidently, it was his day to speak to reporters, like a Wednesday or something during the season, and he just said, "Sorry guys, I don't feel like talking to you today." And he was joking on the way out of the locker room, "I'm never going to win the Rooney Award," which is the award given to the Steelers players who are the most cooperative with the media. So he went from, his reputation was pretty bad, and the team almost traded him even after he was no charges were pressed against him in Georgia. The team almost traded him. So it could have very easily been an ugly end of his Steeler career, and who knows what could have happened to him had he not turned his life around. But he managed to do that, and now he's a family man, and he appears to be a good teammate and a good leader, and he appears to be all about winning and not about himself. So, maybe Antonio Brown could follow suit and perhaps grow up a little bit and actually become an adult and act like an adult and act like a veteran football player, and who knows. So I think this 8-game suspension, and the fact that it's going to start week 1, whether or not he's with the team or not, I think that's good, because I think that would give a team an incentive to sign him. Players like Russell Wilson and Lamar Jackson and Tom Brady, these are big time quarterbacks. They have a lot of sway, right? So the fact that they've lobbied for him, I think that tells me that eventually somebody is going to take a chance on him. And it could be week 6, and if a team feels like he could be the final piece of the puzzle, or if a team is hurting at the receiver position, the fact that he just has to serve the suspension, whether he's on a team or not, I think this will give a team an incentive to sign him, and he can finish out the year with them. So I think it's good for Antonio Brown, and as much as angry as I was at him as recently as last year, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and hopefully wish him well, and that he can turn his life around, and we'll see what happens from here on out. So that concludes part 1 of Steelers Brunch with Tony. If you are listening to this, thank you for the download, and stay tuned for part 2, where I discuss a couple more topics and I'll take some questions. And again, as for everybody in the live chat, don't go anywhere. It's going to be business as usual. So again, my name is Tony Defio, and thank you for listening to part 1 of Steelers Brunch with Tony. Until next time, take it easy. And we're back. Welcome to part 2 of this episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. I am your host, Tony Defio, and I am so thankful that you all are joining me on this fine Saturday afternoon. If you didn't have a chance to listen to part 1 of this episode, I discussed Ben Roethlisberger's return and whether or not he's going to be the Big Ben of old, and how I think he will be. And I discussed Antonio Brown's 8-game suspension, and how I hope that provides some structure to his life, and that he can get it turned around and he could have one great final chapter to his NFL career. So please give that a listen if you haven't yet. So I'm going to cover a couple more topics. And I think the most important thing that I want to cover in this half of the show is the fact that no Steelers players opted out. The deadline to do so was 4 p.m. I'm talking about, of course, is players had the opportunity to opt out of the 2020 season, had their contracts told into 2021, and if they were at higher risk, I believe they would have received $350,000 for 2020. If they were just opting out for over concerns about the coronavirus, it would have been $150,000. But no Steeler players opted out, and from a team perspective, that is great news. I mean, that means that they can move forward with training camp, knowing that they're going to have all of their guys for 2020. Not only the players that are already on the roster, but players that they drafted and players that hope to make the roster in training camp. So that's good news. But I'm not exactly. I would have understood if somebody would have opted out. I think a lot of fans were celebrating the fact that these guys decided, or none of these guys decided to opt out, and they were the sentiment that I seemed to glean from the reactions were like, great, they're being team players, they're not being selfish. In fact, some players around the NFL who did opt out, and some college players like Micah Parsons, the Penn State linebacker, he opted out for 2020, and these players are in many respects being vilified by the media and the fans, and they're being called selfish, and I don't think that's necessarily a cool thing. Right, because these are unprecedented times, and this virus, you just don't know the long-term effects that it could have on even a young, healthy athlete, right? And a lot of these guys have families, and they're close with, obviously they're in contact with their parents who are obviously older, their grandparents. So I mean, I could certainly have understood if a Steeler player decided to opt out, like Cam Hayward, who suffers from asthma, right? If he decided to opt out, if James Conner did so, who's a cancer survivor, if he decided to opt out, I could have certainly understood that. Even Big Ben, he was, as I wrote about in an article that was published yesterday, he was one of the first players that I thought of. Believe it or not, as crazy as this is to say, he's one of the first players I thought of when it came to who could possibly opt out for 2020. Because the guy has become a family man late in his career, at least in his 30s, and as I mentioned in the first half of the show, he contemplated retirement as recently as the 2017 offseason. So I could certainly have seen him say, look, yeah, winning a championship is important to me, but my family's more important, and I'm just going to sit this out. I hope to be back in 2021, and I hope to win a Super Bowl then. I could have seen that. It didn't happen, and that's great. But the thing that I'm most concerned about when it comes to this mentality of one for all and all for one is what happens during the season if a player wakes up with symptoms, right? A scratchy throat, maybe has a fever. Does he report it, or is he afraid to report it because he doesn't want to let his teammates down, or he doesn't want his coaches to overreact and place him on the IR? Because these players, I mean, they're as I said in the first half about Big Ben and his playing through pain. These players are under a tremendous amount of pressure to stay on the field because, as the saying goes, you can't make the club in the tub, right? And if these guys if they decide to not report concussion symptoms or if they're playing on bad ankles or with a broken rib because they just don't want to lose their spot on the team or their starting spot, what happens? Are they going to do? Are they going to have that same mentality with if they come down with COVID-19, or not really necessarily COVID-19 symptoms, but cold symptoms? If they wake up one morning sick, are they going to just keep that to themselves? And yeah, they do get tested regularly, but all it takes is one or two, just a quick exposure, and boom, you could spread that thing like wildfire, right? What if they just happen to find out that somebody that they were in close proximity with, maybe a friend or a family member, that they knew somebody that was that tested positive for COVID-19? Are they going to report that, or are they going to keep that to themselves and hope that everything turns out okay? So that's my only concern about it is this kind of thing. It's not like anything we've ever dealt with before as a society. So as I talked about last week with baseball, I mean, it took one player going out and having a good time, or a couple players for the Marlins going out and having a good time in Atlanta, and they spread it throughout the whole team, and it affected 4 different teams. So if a football team has a massive outbreak, it could ruin its season. So that was my only concern about that, and I just wanted to touch on that briefly. Is that, you know, I don't want these players to feel like they can't, like they're going to be letting their team down or their fans down by opting out or by going on the COVID IR, because it's really it's their, first of all, the COVID-19 part, or the opting out part, would have been their own business. I can't question them for that. A lot of people have said, well, I can't opt out on my job. Well, you could if you would, right? If you had that opportunity. I mean, that's why we admire these athletes and celebrities and the rich and famous, because they get to live the kind of lives that we only wish we could. So if we had the opportunity to opt out over something that could potentially cause us harm, I think we would do it, right? So that's really all I wanted to say about that. And I just have one more topic to discuss before I really delve into the questions from you guys. And that's last evening, I should say, the Pittsburgh Penguins lost to the Montreal Canadiens. I don't know hockey that well. I don't follow it, but they lost to them in 4 games, best of 5 series, and it was a big shocker, a big upset. And the thing that I never really took into consideration with the restart of the NHL season, or the NBA season even, is that these teams, these 2 leagues, they had their regular seasons cut short back in March due to the COVID-19, the pandemic. All sports were shut down. They had their seasons cut short, and they were off for 4.5 months, and boom, they have a few weeks of training camp. They have some exhibition games. I think there was 1, maybe 2 exhibition games, and then boom, it's the playoffs. And what if you consider the fact that the NHL playoffs normally start in mid-April, and half the league doesn't even make it, right? So they're done. They're off for 4 months, 5 months, and even the Stanley Cup champion and the runner-up, they play through mid-June, early June, whatever it is, and they have a few months off before they start the regular season. So essentially, all these teams that participated in the 24-team playoff tournament, Stanley Cup tournament, they were essentially off for an entire off season. Then they had to come back and immediately jump into the playoffs. And I don't care what you had going on 4 months ago. I don't care the fact that you even got Jake Gensel back, and you have Gino and Sid and everything, and Letang. It's almost like a completely new season, right? It's a different kind of chemistry. You don't have the same rhythm you had back then. You know how that goes. And this is where I think the NFL, if I could bring it back to the topic of the Steelers and the NFL, this is where they got lucky. Because provided there is a season, and provided there are no stoppages, or the season isn't postponed or shortened or whatever, they're going to have an entire season to before the playoffs start. So you're going to know who the hot teams are, who the teams that have are in a rhythm and who have that championship look by the time the playoffs start. There have been obviously shortened seasons in the past. I talked about this. The 82 strike shortened the season to just 9 games. And that's true. These players were off for 2 months or whatever it was. However, they did play 7 more regular season games. It's the strike happened after 2 weeks, after 2 games, and then they missed a couple months, and then they played 7 games before the playoffs. So you kind of knew who the good teams were, what teams were on a roll, what teams had that championship quality about them by the time the playoffs started. The NHL didn't have that luxury. The NBA doesn't have that luxury. They basically had to have their season suspended and then roll right into the playoffs after 4 months. And that has to be hard. I don't care how good you are, how talented you are. And I was talking to Wes on Twitter last night, and he said and a lot of people have said this, the Penguins didn't look inspired. They didn't look like they cared. And that's the thing. I mean, sports are so much about momentum, right? We talk about this in football all the time, about how the team that you see, the Steelers team that you see in September and October, or any team in the NFL, the teams that you see early in the season, they look totally different by the time the end of the season rolls around and the playoffs roll around. They look like a totally different team, right? The 2005 Steelers are a great example. They started off strong, and then they sort of fizzled in the middle. As I mentioned in the first half of the podcast, Ben was out for a month or a few weeks after having a minor knee surgery. But, once they got on a roll, they rolled all the way through the playoffs into the Super Bowl. They were a completely different team by December, by the end of December, by the time the playoffs started, than they were when they were going through their funk in November and in the early December. So sports are all about momentum, and the Penguins and any NHL team or NBA team, they didn't have that opportunity to build momentum into the playoffs, right? So, and the Penguins were kind of floundering at the end of the regular season back in March, but they also still had a couple weeks of games to go before the playoffs. So they very well could have gotten on a roll by the time the postseason rolled around and in a normal year. So we'll never know. But again, I think this is where the NFL is lucky. They as I keep saying, they had the gift of time. They got to see how all the other leagues did it, and again, provided there isn't a massive outbreak among one or two or several NFL teams, fans or no fans in the stands, by the time the playoffs roll around, I think the NFL champion, the Super Bowl champion, is going to be the most representative champion of the 4 leagues, because, maybe baseball being second, because baseball is going to have 60 games. So at least they're going to go into the playoff teams are going to go into the postseason on a bit of a roll, right? So those are the topics I wanted to discuss today, and I will finish out the second half of today's podcast answering some questions. So here's one from Ezra, and I can't disagree with this at all, because my ego, I have a big ego. I'm like Antonio Brown, but I'm going to put this up here. Ezra, hey BTSC, Tony has the best show. And since I am a heel, I have to agree with that. I can't be humble, right? So anyway, thank you for that, Ezra. I love the support. Let's see here's one from Wes. Here's a comment from Wes. If we win a Super Bowl in 2020, they could put 1,000 asterisks next to it for all I care. And I couldn't agree more. And I wrote about this a couple months ago. There was a story about I think a Nashville player who said he didn't want a COVID Cup because fans would never consider it legit, and I didn't agree with that. But of course, I wasn't thinking about the dynamic of NHL and NBA teams having to wait a few months before and then jumping right into the playoffs. I was just really talking about it from a normal, some past examples of strike shortened years where people don't really like the 81 baseball season. That was a strike. That was a season it was interrupted by a strike, and nobody talks about that. The Dodgers won the World Series that year. They beat the Yankees. That was a great World Series. Nobody talks about the fact that that was during a strike year. The Redskins 82 championship, the John Riggins Super Bowl, where he goes 40 yards on 4th and 1. That's that iconic moment. Nobody talks about the fact that it was a 9-game season. But again, these teams got to finish out the regular season into the playoffs, whereas maybe as far, when it comes to the Stanley Cup and the NBA final championship final, there, you could maybe put an asterisk next to those two titles because of the weird circumstances that those two leagues found themselves in with the COVID-19. But the Steelers, just the only thing that would be different this year, as it stands right now, is the fact that there wouldn't be any fans in the stands, and that could influence game day officials, because there have been studies in the past that have suggested that the biggest determination of the biggest reason why home teams have such an advantage is because they're influenced by the raucous home crowd when it comes to making calls and calling penalties and that kind of thing, and not just in the NFL, but in all sports. So that's the only thing that might be a different dynamic. But other than that, I think in a lot of ways that might make it more legit, because it's a sort of sterile, sanitized, no pun intended, environment with no fans in the stands. And I agree with Wes. It could be 1,000 asterisks. I don't care. Like Tony Gwynn once said about batting .400 during a strike-shortened year. I'll take it. I'll take it with an asterisk. I don't care. May he rest in peace. Great hitter. Let's see here. What do we have here? Here's one from Mark Tobin, and this has been asked before, but it's a legit question because it's important. Do we keep McDonald after this year? Well, and I credit Dave on talking about this on Monday about right now as it stands, the minimum salary cap for 2021 is $175 million. It could go up based on revenue, but to go from $198 million cap this year all the way down to, even if it's 180 or 185 or who knows, even 10 million taken off of this year's cap, that's gonna lend itself to a lot of tough decisions for the Steelers in the offseason. I mean, you have, as we keep saying, you have Cam Hayward's deal. He's coming into the final year of his contract. He's going to want to stay here, right? Are they going to be able to keep him? You have T.J. Watt coming up. You have Juju. You have James Conner. On and on and on. So with the addition of Eric Ebron in the offseason, he wasn't a cheap signing. I could definitely see them parting ways with McDonald. Absolutely. I mean, I'd like to see them keep provided both McDonald and Ebron are as good as we think they can be in 2020. I'd like to see them keep both of them, but it might come down to just keeping one guy, and it could be one of those guys might have to go, and maybe it's McDonald. Let's see what else we have here. Let's see. Vance, here's one from Donald Nolan. Comment. I think it's a comment. Vance's passion for his farm was evident. I'd be surprised if he plays much longer after this year. I assume I'm not sure what that refers to, but he's still a fairly young guy. Here's Big Marv. What's goody, Tony, and all my Steeler Nation? Hope everyone's doing well today. Thank you, Big Marv. Thank you for joining us. Let's see if I can scroll up and find some more. Here we go. Here's one from Ron Chess. He's a regular viewer of our podcast. Tony, do you think Ebron and Claypool make big impacts? Well, the potential is certainly there. I mean, obviously, Claypool looks like he has the potential to be a really great receiver down the line. Maybe as soon as 2020, we don't know. He certainly has all the. He appears to have all the tools to turn into a fine receiver. As far as Ebron goes, I mean, we've seen he's been productive in the past. I mean, when he was with the Colts had their issues with quarterbacks. Andrew Luck always getting hurt, and they had a lot of problems with quarterback, and he was hurt himself. So I could certainly see, if I had to choose one, I would definitely go with Ebron, because I think he's obviously going to be the number 2 tight end, or maybe even the number 1 tight end by the end of the year. Whereas Claypool, he's a rookie. He has a lot more to learn. He has a lot more to endure. And plus, the Steelers have a pretty good group of young receivers as it is, with Juju and James Washington and Deontay Johnson, who everybody thinks is going to be a superstar. So it might be a little harder. And rookie receivers have had, with Deontay Johnson being the exception, rookie receivers often have a tough time, and we saw what happened with James Washington a couple of years ago. So I would, if I had to pick one, it would be Ebron. And I missed a super chat earlier. I'm going to go back and try to find that, because that's a big donation, and we're always appreciative of those. So I'm going to scroll back here and see if I can find that super chat question. Oh, here's a super sticker from EJ Lewis. Thank you, EJ. What else we have here? I'm trying to scroll back down and find that super chat before it's too late. Bear with me. I might have missed it. Did I miss it? All right. No, I don't see it. Maybe it's just my imagination. I don't know. But we'll see what we have. Let's see what else here. Who is your camp darling? Well, you know who my camp darling is. I've been pretty consistent with that, and it's Kevin Dotson. I love that pick. I love it. I love his personality. I love the fact that he was such a consistent player at Louisiana, and quite frankly, I'm surprised that he didn't get drafted he didn't get invited to the combine. I still don't know what that's all about. It's not unprecedented, but he seemed like he had such a great college resume, and he was such a consistent player in college that you would think that scouts and coaches would want to know more about him, and general managers would want to know more about that guy. But I think the fact that he didn't get invited to the combine, I think that may eventually will be to the Steelers' benefit, because he could have been picked a lot sooner than he was otherwise. So that's my camp darling for sure. And I'm also looking forward to seeing what Anthony McFarland could do. And this is the one time, I wish there would be preseason, because guys like him, I'd love to see what they could do, because it's always fun watching. I love watching running backs in the preseason, because it's easier for them to shine, I think, than any other position. And I was really looking forward to McFarland and that just exceptional speed that I saw on tape when I went back and watched his highlights from Maryland. So I guess my camp darlings both reside in the 4th round, because that's where both those guys were picked in the 2020 draft. So Kevin Dotson 1, Anthony McFarland 2. Let's see. Here's a comment from Alex Flores. In my belief, Juju is not a number 1 receiver. He's a fabulous number 2. Do you agree? I don't know yet. I'm not willing to go there yet, because I think last year was such a compromised year for everybody. The offense was in such a bad place due to Ben's injury and the lack of experience at quarterback, and the fact that Juju didn't have a top guy throwing him the football. So we don't know yet. I mean, I think everything that you saw in years 1 and 2 with Juju would suggest that he can't be a number 1. But maybe he really did benefit from Antonio Brown's presence. I think if that were the case, we'll find out this year. But I'm not ready to go there yet. I'm not. I think he still has the skill set to be a number 1 receiver, and I think he's proven that he has that potential in the past. It's just a matter of was he aided simply by Antonio Brown, or does he have it in him to be the Antonio Brown of this receiving core, with a Deontay Johnson and a James Washington and Chase Claypool acting as his young money, so we'll see. But I'm not willing to write him off just yet as a number 1. So, and again, I think guys like Washington and Johnson benefited from the fact that despite the quarterback play, Juju did see a lot of double coverage last year. So I see that we're getting pretty late in the show. So I wanted to take this time to thank everybody again for for joining me on parts 1 and 2 of this episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. I thank you all for the questions, the donations, the kind words. And I just want to remind you that I'll be on with Brian Anthony Davis on Monday for Steelers Q&A at 5 o'clock. And then I think we're doing a retro show right after that. So please tune into that too. And if you have a chance, subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out our podcast and all the podcasting platforms, and give both the first half and the second half of this show a listen. I hope I provided you with some great content. So until next time, you guys have a great weekend. So long, everybody.